Uh, there was reports that the video from yesterday's class on 4/20/2016, the audio and video did not sync correctly. I will still leave that video up so you can listen to the audio, I guess, if you want. But I just wanted to make a quick video here showing some of the things that we did yesterday in class. One of the first things I talked about is the lab we did last week with our quick session collection. In here, inside of the quick session collection, now again, I'll back out here and start from scratch. I'm under my server manager, remote desktop services, quick session collection. One of the first things you guys had to do was to install a non-Microsoft program onto the server and add it to this list. Now once that got added to the list, you needed to use Internet Explorer to go to the web page to view it, our remote app web page. And to get that, you type in https:// the name of your server, its fully qualified domain name /rdweb. So my fully qualified domain name is serverdc.contoso.com, and then I add the rdweb. Now the first time you go to this, you are more than likely going to get this certificate error. So we can continue to this website, and now we can view the certificate and notice that it is issued to serverdc.contoso.com. So since it's issued to serverdc.contoso.com, that's what we have to have in our URL exactly. So we need to install this certificate, which I'm doing now, into the Trusted Root Certificate Authority. Once we have it in there, and it should give me a message here. Once we have it in there, we can go back into the website and no longer get the certificate error. So https:// serverdc.contoso.com/rdweb. And now it takes me to the website, no certificate error or warning or anything like that. When I log into the site, I have to use the name of my domain, which mine is Contoso, and my username. I'm using administrator. When I log in here, I can see all of my programs that are listed. Okay, so that was kind of the first step. Add the non-Microsoft program, go to the web page, trust the certificate, and see that they are showing up in the list. And now a user could click on these and run them. The other piece was to configure under the control panel what's known as the remote app and desktop connection. What you do is you configure this by essentially copying this example. But since our certificate is issued to serverdc.contoso.com, I need to add serverdc.contoso.com in there, and then the rest would look just like the example. After you get this, mine's saying it already exists, so I had it set up in class. But after you do that, it's going to go through and find the programs that you have published through your remote app. And then what it does is underneath your start menu, it adds those programs that the users can click on and run remotely. So now that they're sitting here under the work resources, I could create shortcuts to this under the desktop. Users could run them through their start menu. It's a little bit easier access for those users rather than opening up a full-blown desktop again. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight in what we did last week. This week we are building upon what we did with remote desktop and adding the remote desktop gateway. What the remote desktop gateway does for us is it provides an additional level of security by using port 443 HTTPS and certificates in SSL to encrypt the data. going to our remote desktop gateway server. Let me just pull up a quick diagram here, give you a quick background of what the gateway service is doing for us, and then show an example of the setup. Like I said, in the video where the audio and the video didn't quite sync, I go through quite a bit more information and detail on how the gateway server works and some of the background information on it. Like I said, you can watch that and listen to that if you want to possibly get some of that background information. This video is going to be just more so showing the configuration. So typically what happens when someone tries to remote desktop in to a server is they will go over port 3389 from their home computer, from a computer on the internet, over port 3389 directly to the terminal server or the remote desktop server. Now the problem with that is that information going over port 3389 is unencrypted, and the only thing protecting the terminal server is the username and login box. And we know that usernames and passwords are not always the most secure. What we can do now is we can put in the middle a terminal server or remote desktop gateway server. The information in between the gateway server and the remote computer trying to remote desktop in is now going to be encrypted over port 443 using an SSL type of certificate. Now with this information between the laptop and the gateway is encrypted, but then once we get inside of the internal network, port 3389 is then used to make the connection to the terminal server. So we kind of have a middleman here that will encrypt the data for us going out to the internet. But once we are internal, then we can communicate over port 3389. So it's recommended that if you have clients that will be connecting to the terminal servers through the internet, that you install this piece. Now your terminal server gateway or your remote desktop gateway server should be a separate machine from your terminal servers. And what we're going to set up in the lab is everything's on the same box. So, not good security practice, but we have everything on our first server. We have Active Directory and terminal services and the gateway server and DNS, and we kind of have just everything we can possibly cram onto one server for the lab environment. So just keep in mind that's something you typically don't want to do. In the PowerPoint slides, I go through some more detail on how this process and the connection works and how the information gets encrypted. Now, where can you get your certificates from to make this connection? In best practice, you'd want to go buy a certificate from a commercially trusted CA like Comodo or VeriSign or GoDaddy. That way, the browsers and the computers will trust that automatically. What we are doing is we're getting it from a self-signed certificate, and when you do that, you need to manually trust the certificate, just like I showed you a few minutes ago for our last lab. But let me kind of dive into the configuration here a little bit and show you what we set up yesterday and what you guys are going to be doing for the lab. So the first thing that you do is you add the remote desktop gateway role. You should probably have a green plus on this. And when you go through this wizard to add it, it's going to ask you a couple of questions. One of the questions is going to be, what's the fully qualified domain name of a remote desktop gateway server? And for most of you guys, it's going to be serverdc.contoso.com. Now, if you chose a different domain name, it may be serverdc.example.com, whatever your domain name is. And what it's trying to do at that point is it's trying to create the certificate. But after you run through the wizard, you're going to have a new tool now. And that new tool is under the Terminal Services Remote Desktop Gateway Manager. Now, in order for this to work, there are two different things you need to set up. You need to configure the server, and that consists of installing a certificate, creating a connection policy, and a resource authorization policy. And the second piece is to set up the client to go through the gateway rather than going directly to the server over port 3389. We want it to go through the gateway using SSL. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to configure my server here with my SSL certificate. And I'm going to just create a self-signed. Now you may already have one, and if you do, when you hit OK here to create the self-sign, it's going to tell you that one already exists and ask you if you want to replace it. So I'm just replacing it and I hit OK. I'm applying my changes. After you have your certificate set up, notice that here it's issued to serverdc.contoso.com, issued by, so it created it itself. I can see when the expiration date is. But after you do that, you need to create what's known as your CAP policy and your WRAP policy. The CAP policy is the connection authorization policy. This specifies who can connect to the remote desktop gateway service. After you specify the CAP policy, then you specify a WRAP policy. That dictates which servers you have access to or which clients you can remote desktop to. So once this gets done here, I'll show you those policies. So under my policies, I can create new authorization policies. And this will ask me if I want to create both the CAP and the WRAP, or if I just want to do one or the other. I'm going to do both. And you give it a name. I'm going to call this example. And now it runs through who has access to the gateway server and how are they going to gain access. I'm going to use passwords, not smart cards, but I'm going to have them enter in a password, and I'm going to say they have to be a member of the accounting group. Maybe I don't even have an accounting group. Let's see what groups I have. Not on this server. I have a sales group. So you have to be part of the sales group in order to get through the gateway to remote desktop in. And if I want to put certain computers in here, I can add computer groups as well. But I'll just leave it as this, and I'll add one more, my domain admins. Now it's asking about device redirection. When someone remote desktops in, do we want to redirect their local resources like clipboard, printers, ports, things like that, over to the remote desktop machine? I'm going to enable that. If I want to kick them off for being idle, or I want to have a session timeout, I can configure that as well. I'm not going to do that. I hit next, and it gives me a rundown. So it says, if a user is a member of any of the following user groups, sales or domain admins, and if the computer is a member of any of the following groups, I didn't select any, and if the user supports the following Windows authentication protocols, passwords, then that user is going to be able to connect. Next, I would set up my resource authorization policy. Again, this specifies which resources they have access to if they have been authenticated. So if their CAP policy checks out, now what can they access? Who can they remote desktop to? So it's going to apply to those same two groups. And I either can specify a select group of devices that they can remote desktop into, or I can allow access to any single computer. I'm going to use default port 3389 internally. If you would be changing those ports, you would have to change it here at this point in time. So the summary here says, if the user is a member of the following groups, sales or domain admins, then the user can connect remotely through the RD gateway to any computer on the network, and the user can connect to these network resources through the following ports, 3389. I hit finish and close. And now what I need to do is I need to configure my client to go through the gateway server. So if I pull back up the example here, or the diagram I should say, what I did is I set up this gateway server and I put a CAP policy. So when someone tries to connect, that CAP policy is going to be evaluated, and it would say, are you a member of the sales or domain admins? Yep. Are you providing a password? Yep. You've now been authorized. Now who do you have access to? Do you have access to this terminal server or that one or a different one? I said in my policy, my resource authorization policy, that they can remotely connect to any one of these, and I'm going to use port 3389, the default port for that connection. When the terminal server, remote desktop server, replies back to the gateway, goes over port 3389, he gets it, the gateway server does, encrypts it, sends it back to the client. So now I'm going to configure my client side to use the gateway. Needed to trust my certificate on the client again, since I had overwritten the existing one. Let me see if this will work. So I want to log in with my Contoso/administrator. I got authenticated onto the gateway server, and now I'm going to be authenticated onto the remote desktop machine. Through the gateway server, it takes a little bit longer to make the initial connection, but once you're connected, it's quick, just like it is before. Being authenticated now onto the remote desktop server. And I just got that certificate warning there because it's saying I'm trying to get onto server dc.contoso.com, who the certificate is issued to, but I'm connecting to 1111. That's not matching up. So it's asking, are you sure you want to connect? Because the resource you're trying to access is not matching the certificate. And I clicked yes because I know they're the same machine. And now I'm remote desktoped in through the gateway server. So if I pull up my remote desktop gateway manager and I take a look under my monitoring, I can see that I have a connection. So now I have a connection through the gateway server, and my information is being encrypted. So that hopefully gives you an idea of how the Gateway Manager server works, what you need to do in the lab. As I said, I will still keep up with that video. If you want, you can listen to the audio, but this should give you a decent idea of what we did in class the other day. If you have any questions as you're going through the lab or digging into this, please let me know and I can hopefully answer those questions for you. Thanks for watching.